All right, so I just did a video where I was discussing basically the whole idea of how some of the trafficking rings we're hearing about appear to be related to mafia. And I can see in our society kind of how it might be a difficult leap for some people to envision how that could be related to mafia. And my idea of why that would be hard for some people to see that as the same thing is going to be mostly based on popular culture. Because in our popular culture, our movies, our films, everything we're experiencing really mainstream. I'm not going to say all of popular culture, but in mainstream, we're somewhat sheltered from the sexual violence aspect of what goes on or what could possibly go on in something like a mafia. Okay, so if we just look at some of the shows in existence, there's plenty of shows and movies, but for example, Godfather, there's all sorts of really horrific things happening there. But I don't remember seeing any sexual violence, and especially sexual violence between men. But does that really exist? Just because we're not seeing it in popular culture, does it make sense that it's not happening? And another way I kind of conceptualize that is to look at, okay, we have ancient Rome and the gladiators, where they had these public arenas where they had these men enslaved that killed each other. But all of our renditions of it, all the movies about it, there's no sexual conquest happening. There's no sexual violence in the arena. But then they pan to the arena, right? Or there's other parts of the show, and what's happening there? They're having all sorts of orgies and public sex and whatever, okay? Do you actually believe that in ancient Rome, in these gladiator games and arenas, that there wasn't straight up sexual violence inside of the arena? Okay, and I'm mentioning that because that also relates to kind of what we're hearing coming out of these trafficking rings. And especially when it comes to the testimony of Sasha Riley. It sounds like straight up mafia because they're just killing people right in front of him or having him do it. Okay? But the difference is, and where it might be difficult for most people to see it, would be that it's, these parties are all about sexual violence, and very often sexual violence against kids. So the result is that as a society, we have the framework, right? We have the idea of mafia activity, but what we don't have, for the most part, is this idea of it being so violent sexually, and that part of it just kind of and I'm going to say that aspect of it really makes it difficult for a lot of people to conceptualize. We can conceptualize mafia violence and how horrific it is, but when you add forced intercourse and sexual violence, especially involving children, it's just become so overwhelming that I feel like there's probably a lot of people that just can't even imagine, how is that even happening? they, they're likely not going to be the people making the connection and saying, that looks a lot like what we've learned about mafia, right? Okay? And we'll take it a step further, because what kind of mafia are we talking about? Because, Sasha Riley's describing these parties where all these people in power are participating, right? Senators, people in Congress, judges, as far up as the Supreme Court, are arriving at these parties where this mafia activity is going on, which makes it even more difficult for a society that has learned, right? We've learned to trust government. These are people we elected, right? They're supposed to represent us. Judges are supposed to be respectable, and we're supposed to be maybe not attending parties where children are being raped and murdered, right? So yeah, just something to think about, and maybe why it's so difficult for so many people to actually see or accept what's happening, what we're hearing about.